Good day. Bonjour. How are you? Welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. We've had a great week. We've had Hugh, what a privilege. Daniel, Seth, Dave again, Isabel from Switzerland, all sorts of people. And so it goes on. Next week we've got mainly storytellers from America and North America and the Caribbean, or at least that's the theme of the week. And if it works, we'll have people from Mexico, from the USA, from Canada and France, and a couple of tellers telling Caribbean stories, including the Great Troop and the Return of Baden Prince. But right now, it's me. And I'm going to tell a few stories. And the first I'm going to tell it was collected from an old Romany woman in about 1915 in England. And it's a version of Cinderella, Mossy Coat. And I think that I've been telling this virtually since I started storytelling, but one of the things I've loved about this story, I realised when I was doing a storytelling in a school in Derby, and there were mainly most of the children out in the classroom were from Bangladesh, and they're all wearing their own clothes, and they're all the clothes that were in the story. And I realised that when the Dom and the Lom and the Rom left northern India hundreds of years ago, and they walked for 100 miles and they sat down by a fire and they listened to stories, and they walked for another 100 miles and they sat down by a fire and they listened to more stories and exchanged stories, and eventually in the 1500s they arrived in England. But the clothes, the memory of those clothes had stayed, and you can tell that by this story. She's not called Cinderella in this story. She's called Mossy Coat, because as we know, there are hundreds of Cinderella stories. And she changes her name regularly. And Mossy Coat was the most beautiful girl in the village. Everyone wanted to marry her, including the local tinker, the man that went from door to door selling and mending things. And every night he would bring her presents, sometimes a necklace, sometimes earrings, and sometimes a bracelet. She loved the presents, but she didn't want to marry the man. So she ran up those little caravan steps. Mum! I love the presents, but I don't want to marry the man. Mum said, don't worry about it. I'm making this petticoat. And when it is finished, now some of you don't even know what a petticoat is. I know this because I've asked in 100 classrooms. Petticoat is like an underskirt. I'm making this petticoat. When it is finished, all our troubles will be over. In the meantime, tell him you can't marry him until he brings you a dress of white satin with gold leaves on it the size of a man's hand, and it must fit perfectly. Well, she ran down the steps. Mum says, I can't marry you till you bring me a dress of white satin, gold leaves on it the size of a man's hand, and it must fit perfectly. Well, he took a measure and off he went, and a week later he was back, and what did he have but a dress of white satin, gold leaves on the size of a man's hand, and it fitted perfectly. Mum, don't worry, she said. I've nearly finished the petticoat. In the meantime, tell him you can't marry him until he brings you a dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky, and it must fit perfectly. Ran down the steps. Mum says, I can't marry you till you bring me a dress of silk, colour of the birds of the sky, and it must fit perfectly. Well, once more he went off, and once more he came back. And once more he had exactly what she had been asked for, a dress of silk, colour of the birds of the sky, and it fitted perfectly. Mum! Don't worry, she said. I've nearly finished the petticoat. In the meantime, Tell him you can't marry him until he brings you a pair of silver slippers, and they must be neither too big or too small. They must fit perfectly. Well, he went down the steps. Me mum says I can't marry you till you bring me a pair of silver slippers, neither too big or too small. They must fit perfectly. Willie looked at the 3-inch feet and off he went. And a week later he was back. And what did he have but a pair of silver slippers, neither too big or too small. They fitted perfectly. Mum! Don't worry, she said. I've nearly finished the petticoat. In the meantime, tell him, if he meets you outside the church at 10 o'clock tomorrow, you'll be married. Well, Mum hadn't steered her wrong yet, but she's a bit worried now. She went downstairs. Me mum says, if you meet me outside the church at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we'll be married. Well, he's happy and he's laughing. When off he goes, he comes back and he's got a pair of silver slippers. And I mucked that up totally. Such is the way of stories. I was drifting off to the sounds around me. Well, up he went and he got a pair of silver slippers, exactly the right size for the girl. They fitted perfectly. And we know we've gone past that. You know, there's times, when like a juggler drops a ball, you have to just pick it up and start. And I was at the church. He'd just come back. And she'd just told him that if she met him outside the church at 10 o'clock tomorrow, they'd be married. Well, he's happy, he's laughing, he's going down, he's doing cartwheels down the street. Meanwhile, she's back upstairs. Mum, what have you done to me? Don't worry, said Mum. I've finished the petticoat. And it wasn't any ordinary petticoat, but it was a petticoat of moss with gold threads running through it, and would take her anywhere she wanted. And Mum, who knew a thing or two about the future, told her to put on a mossy petticoat. Over the top of it, she was to put her dirtiest, grottiest working clothes. She was to take them in her best clothes, put them under her arm, and wish herself 100 miles away. When she got there, she was to walk till she came to a big house. She was to knock on the front door and ask for a job. Well, just like you all would, she did exactly what her mother said. She put on a mossy petticoat. Over the top of it, she put her dirtiest, grottiest working clothes. She took her best clothes, put them in a bundle under her arm, and wished herself 100 miles away. When she got there, she walked till she came to a big house. She knocked on the front door and asked for a job. And what can you do, said the mistress. And the best cook in the world, said Mosscoat. I've already got a cook, said the mistress. I tell you what, you can be the undercook. And she took her downstairs and introduced her to all the other servants. Well, in those days, the best job in the kitchen was the cook's, and the second best was the undercook. And no way were they going to let this little travelling girl come in off the street and take the second best job in the kitchen. So as soon as the mistress was out the way, they gave her all the nasty jobs to do. Cleaning out the fireplace, cleaning the grease from the pan. They wouldn't even let her wash. And she soon had dirt from the tip of her toes to the tip of her nose. Well, life carried on like this for some time, until news came of a great dance, and it was to last 3 nights. And the first night, the mistress invited Mosscoat up to her room. All the other servants thought she was going to get sacked, she was going to lose her job. When she got up there, the mistress said, Mosscoat, would you like to come to the dance with myself, the master, and our son? Mosscoat says, thank you kindly, ma'am. But look at the state of me. If I sat in your fine carriage, I'd make the seats all greasy and nasty and disgusting. And if any fine gentleman sat next to me, I'd make his silks all greasy and nasty. Thank you kindly, ma'am, but I can't. And she went back downstairs. What did the mistress want, said the servants. Well, actually, said Mosscoat, she invited me to the dance. Liar, they said, and they hit her on the head with skillets. Well, if you don't know what a skillet is, it's like a cast iron frying pan. Ouch. Well, the next day the same thing happened again, and again they called her a liar, and again they hit her on the head with skillets. Well, by this time, as you can understand, she's getting a little bit upset. So by an enchantment, she put all the servants to sleep. She went upstairs, she put on a mossy petticoat. Over the top of it, she put her dirtiest, grottiest working clothes. She didn't. Over the top of it, she put a dress of white satin, gold leaves on the size of a man's hand, and her silver slippers. And she wished herself at the dance. And she danced all night with the mistress's son. And whenever she was asked where she came from, all she'd say was she came from a place where they hit her on the head with skillets. Well, at the end of the dance, she made her excuses. She went out in the corridor. She wished herself back to the big house. Whatever happened to us, said the servants as she woke them up. You've been asleep, she said. Well, please don't tell the mistress. They said, do have this bar of stockings. Do have this next week's wages. Do have a bar of soap. I mean, a bar of soap. Amazing. Right now, it's amazing. Most essential thing in your life. Wash your hands continuously. Well, they were kind to her for 5 minutes. But the next day, the same thing happened again. And again, they called her a liar. And again, they hit her on the head with skillets. Once more, she put them to sleep. This time, she went upstairs. She put on her dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky, and her silver slippers. And she had a mossy petticoat underneath, and she wished herself to the dance. And she danced all night with the mistress's son. And whenever she was asked where she came from, all she'd say was she came from a place where they hit her on the head with skillets. Well, at the end of the night, she tried to get away, but he was one of those boys held on too tight. She thought, oh, forget this. And she just wished herself away from the middle of his arms. And as she disappeared, his hand must have just touched her foot, for one silver slipper fell off. Well, back at the big house, once more they woke up the servants. And once more they gave her presents so she wouldn't tell the mistress. But the mistress's son, he couldn't sleep. Mum, I'm in love. Mum, I've got to find her. Mum, I can't stand it, neither can I, said Mum. And if it'll keep you quiet, we'll get all the girls of the land and we'll try the silver slipper on each of them. And they tried it on all, and it fitted none. And the only one who hadn't tried it on was Mossycoat. And of course, as soon as she tried it on, it fitted perfectly. He was about to take her in his arms. Hold on, she said, and she went upstairs and came down to a dress of white satin. He was about to take her in his arms again. Hold on, she said, and she went upstairs and came down in a dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky. This time, she'd learnt her lesson, and he asked her story, and she told him those parts she wanted him to hear, but she said nothing about being hit on the head with skillets. The one thing I don't understand, he said, you said you came from a place where they hit you on the head with skillets. She said not a word. She just looked round at all the other servants, and the master, the mistress, and their son understood perfectly, and those servants were driven from the house by the dogs, and there were new servants employed, and there was a great wedding, and there was masses to eat, and if there was even more to drink, and of course, had you been there, each and every one of you would have been invited. Why, then, the story ends. Well, that's the thing with working life. You lose it in the middle, you pick it up, and you get on with it. That's what we're having to do with life at the moment. We're losing a little of it, but we're picking it up, and we're getting on with it. Now, when I'm talking to children, I'm running writing workshops, I describe my head as Fanny Fanshaw's handbag. Now that makes no sense, of course. But Fanny Fanshawe was a grand old Victorian woman, lived in Colchester. And when I worked at Colchester Arts Centre, she used to make mosaics. And she was one of the last of the Victorians. She had got evacuated from France at the beginning of the First World War, from finishing school. She was magnificent. Wore these big hats, silver-top cane. She used to make mosaics, and at the end of her exhibition, I used to take the mosaics, take her pictures, back from the Arts Centre to a little sheltered accommodation, a little flat just round the corner. And she'd sit me down, and the way of old people, she'd give me a cup of tea, always in the best china. It terrified me. Said, you know, Sean, the trick to making mosaics is if you see something on the pavement and you think it might be useful later, you just pick it up and you pop it in your handbag, and when you get home, you'll put it in that. She had a little dish full of buttons and bits and pieces. He said, and then when you're ready, you just pop it in your mosaic. For instance, I was walking down Colchester High Street one day, and I saw a piece of broken watch in the gutter. And I picked it up and I popped it in my handbag. I had this wonderful vision of this grand Victorian woman in a big hat, and a silver-top cane, bending down and picking up bits of broken watch from the gutter. She said, I popped it in my handbag, and when I got home, I put it in the dish over there. And 5 years later, I was making that mosaic, and she pointed to the mosaic, and she said it had a bit of a gap in. And I thought, I know what'll fit in there, that piece of broken watch. And I picked it up and I popped it in, and it was perfect. So, when I'm writing, I think my head is Fanny Fanshaw's handbag that's filled with memories. And when I've got a bit of a gap and I don't know what to write, I'll fiddle around in Fanny Fanshaw's handbag and I'll pull out a memory. For instance, one day I was walking down by the river at Wivenhoe near Colchester. And there was an old, or there may still be, the remains of an old boat yard there, with just the skeleton, just the scaffold left, just the girders. And it was midnight, and it was full moon. And I looked up, and there was someone walking across a girder about 2 floors up. And I'm thinking, my heart was in my mouth, I'm thinking, I really hope he gets to the other side okay, because my first aid is rubbish. But sure enough, he got to the other side, and I forgot all about it. And years later, I was on my way to a school in Woodbridge, on Woodbridge Base, when the Americans were still there. And I had a ghost poem pop into my head. And I pulled up in a lay-by and wrote the first couple of verses down. I carried on to school, and I thought, well, I'll ask the kids for ideas on how to carry this on. I wanted the ghosts getting into trouble. And they gave me ideas, and they were very good, but they weren't what I wanted. So I dug round in Fanny Fanshaw's handbag, and I pulled out that memory of that shipyard and that boy walking across it at midnight, just across the girders. And this is the poem. Or rhyme, or story, depending on how you look at it. He seemed a very average ghost, the kind you see straight through, created for a DVD, too perfect to be true. His hair was long, his boots were tall, his buckle shone on his belt. His jacket was made from satin, and his plumed hat pressed from felt. His spurs and sword they clattered as he marched across the street, but all he got was insults from the people that he'd meet. Get out of the way, you fool, they said, and where did you get that hat? Or why don't you get your hair cut and just look at the state of that? They didn't like his manner. They didn't like his dress. Whatever he did, like walking through walls, failed totally to impress anyone at all except Rosie, who played all day on her own, who gazed at the road, who played all day on a taunt, who gazed at the road from a window for hours, who everyone else thought was odd, amazing, she thought when she saw him. But isn't it really so sad how those people out there treat that poor man like that? I do think they're ever so bad. So she ran down the stairs in an instant, and she ran right into the night, and the crowd on the pavement that watched her. They'd never seen such an odd sight. On the one hand, the ghost getting jostled. On the other, Rosie in tears, pushing past giants in her night clothes, and her being only 10 years, she pushed past the ones who were laughing, she pushed past the ones who looked mean, she pushed her way through till she stood at the last place the ghost had been seen, and then she thought that she glimpsed him inside the old shipyard wall that hadn't been used in her lifetime, that was crumbling and not safe at all. So she ran across girders and stairways, and she leapt over chains, bricks and poles, and to the crowd on the pavement that watched her, she sent a shiver through each of their souls. The loud mouths were no longer laughing, they no longer swaggered and swore as the building was collapsing around her, and she fell from the shed's second floor. Below her was metal and rubble and reinforced concrete posts, and the crowd all thought she'd had it, but Rosie remembered the ghost, and the ghost knew all about Rosie, how she didn't have one real friend, and the person to blame for her falling was really himself in the end. So he ran through the piles of paving, and he ran through the last standing wall, and he stood with his arms stretching outwards, exactly where Rosie would fall, and he caught her like she was a feather, and he set her gently down. Now everyone wants to know Rosie, and the ghost is the toast of the town. And I think I'm going to do a story about another brave girl. And It's from way back in time. The heroine of this story, this little girl, had lost both her parents, and she went to live with her cousin, and her cousin wasn't very good at children. Everything that the little girl did annoyed her. If she was doing the washing up, well, the plate that the cousin would take out to inspect would be the one with that little bit of cabbage stuck to it. If she was trying to go up the stairs incredibly carefully, she'd always stand on the one that creaked. Be quiet. And whatever she did, it was never right. And one night she'd had enough. And she thought, I'm not going to stay here any longer. And she walked out into the forest. And you know what forests are like at night. You can hear the wolves howling. At least I can. Out in Kolibica, where my house is sometimes. Well, my house is there, but I am sometimes. Can't get there at the moment. Kolibica's Bistrița in Romania. And she could hear those sounds of the forest. She could hear every twig crack. She heard the birds, little animals scuffling around in the undergrowth. She heard the hoot of an owl. Was she afraid? Not a bit of it. Well, the little girl carried on till she came to a big, well, more like a castle. Somewhere between a mansion and a castle. And she knocked on the door. And she looked up. The way, you know, when you knock on the door and there's no answer, you look through, you look to see if you can see anyone at the windows looking at you. And there in an upstairs window was a skull. Can you let me in? Said the little girl. Well, most of us would be afraid if all we saw was a talking skull in the window. But was she afraid? Not a bit of it. Well, yeah, I can, said the skull, but if I come down, and I sort of, as I bid on down the stairs, and I knock the bolt open as I come by, I'm going to hit the floor, and I'm not going to be able to get up again. Can you carry me back up the stairs? And the girl promised. And so down came the skull, ba-dum, hit the lock, undid the door. The little girl came inside, picked up the skull, cradled it in her arms, and took it back upstairs. And they went into a room, and there was a table, and she put the skull on the table. And the skull said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "To tell you the truth, I am." So the skull said, "Well, go into the kitchen. There's eggs and flour and milk there. Make us some pancakes. Or make us just one big pancake, I think. And whatever happens, take no notice." There she was. She mixed up the egg, the milk and the flour, got it to a smooth paste, and down the chimney, boing! She looked down, there was a bone, leg bone. Boom, boom, boom. Bones for 2 feet. Boom! A pelvis. Was she afraid? Not a bit of it. They stopped putting themselves together. Boom! Down comes the spine. Boom! Down comes the rib cage. Boom! Down comes the arm bones. Fibula and tibula. Or is that leg? I don't know. Down come all those little digits, those little finger bones for the hand. And there was a complete skeleton minus the skull. It was walking around the room, feeling its way around the room. Was the little girl afraid? Not a bit of it. She just carried on, and in the end she just made this beautiful pancake. And she took it back to where the skull was, and she cut it in half, and her half had lemon and sugar on. She had it all up, but the skull's half turned black and burnt, and its skull ate that and had black bits in its teeth, but The little girl leaned off and cleaned them up for her. To the skull. And the skull said, little girl, I tell you what, if you can take me in your arms and hold me all night, tomorrow morning I'll make you the luckiest little girl in the whole wide world. But you mustn't let go of me. Well, the girl promised, and that night when she went to bed, she took the skull with her. They were in the skull's bed, a big 4-poster affair. In the middle of the night, in came the skeleton. He grabbed the skull, it started pulling and pulling and pulling, and she held and held and held, and it pulled and pulled and pulled, and it held and held and held, and this went all night, and she didn't. And just at first light, the skeleton disappeared. And the girl drifted off asleep, and when she woke up, the skull was nowhere to be seen. I failed, she thought. I've promised, told him. Just then, a beautiful lady in white appeared in the doorway. She said, I told you I was going to make you the luckiest little girl, and I'll tell you my story. When I was a young lady, an old lord wanted to marry me. And I refused to marry him. And he stabbed me through the heart. And my father took out his sword and lopped off that lord's head. And the lord was buried without his skull. And every night he comes and he tries to take mine. And every night he fails. But little girl, tonight, it was you who saved me. And I don't think that skeleton's ever going to come back, and I can sleep in peace. I told you I was going to make you the luckiest little girl in the world, so I'll give you this house. And because you'll need company, I'll give you friends to play with. And because you'll need people to look after you, I'll give you servants to serve you. And maybe when you're 16 or 18, a prince will come along, and you may fall in love or you may not. And you might marry him or you might not, but I'll give you every opportunity. It's up to you. And with that, the lady in white disappeared. And the house was full of light and laughter and children playing and servants bringing in great platefuls of food and drink. And so it went on until probably when the little girl was 17, maybe 18, maybe 19, a prince passed by. And they became great friends. And whether she married him, I know not, because that's their business. And that is a totally different story. Well, while we're concentrating, I think this is a heroine day. Strong women. So I'm going to finish on well, what happens with Cinderella stories? They break off into two directions. One's about property and marriage, which is the one with the stepsisters and so forth, and another springs off into the I love you more than salt stories, where a father is asking for too much love. And of course, that's the same story that Shakespeare used in King Lear. But this is a story from East Anglia. I was reminded of it earlier in the week when Hugh told Tom Tit Tot. And both Tom Tit Tot and this story, Caporushes, came from, were collected, were written down, first written down by Mrs. Walters Thomas. And she wrote down for the Ipswich Journal in 1878, although that's when they were published. She wrote down a series of stories that her own nurse had told her. And Tom Tit Tot was one, and the Gypsy Woman. And this is another, it's Caporushes. I do love this story. And before I start, you look down at the bottom of, before you go and make the next cup of tea, look down at the bottom of the page. There's a little hat there. And if you're feeling really like it, and if you've got a little money, maybe you'll drop a groat or two in. Because right now, none of us storytellers are able to go out and tell stories to people. And more importantly, get paid for it. This is Caporushes. And it's from way back in time when my hair was dark and my beard was ginger and all my teeth were my own. And there was a rich man, a merchant, and he had 3 daughters. And he turned round to the first daughter and he said, "How much do you love me?" He was a man, he was dad, Dads especially need to be told that they're doing okay. And their children love them. And the oldest daughter turns around and says, "Daddy dear, I love you more than all the gold and all the silver in all of the world." He said, "Oh, this is wonderful, wonderful, thank you, darling. You do indeed love me." And he turns around to his second daughter and said, "Daughter dear, how much do you love me?" And she thought, he said, "Daddy dear, I love you more than life itself." Better and better. And then he turned round to his youngest, and if truth be known, his favourite. He said, "Daughter dear, how much do you love me?" And she thought long and she thought hard. And after much thought and much consideration, which is a very long time, he said, "Daddy dear, I love you more than fresh meat loves salt." "What? You don't love me at all. Go upstairs. Get some dresses out of your dead mother's chest. Roll them up and disappear. And never darken my doorstep again." She was devastated, but she went upstairs and took a dress of gold, a dress of silver, and a dress of silk, the colour of the birds of the sky, and she rolled them up and she put them in a little bundle. She put that bundle on the end of a stick and she started walking. And in those days, there were only old tracks on paths and bramble bushes, and she got all tattered and torn. Till she came to a stream, and on the other side of the stream was a great house. And next to the stream was a hollow tree. She got her beautiful clothes and she put them in the hollow tree. And then she waded out in the stream and she cut rushes. And she made herself a big cape of rushes with a big hood which she pulled over her head. She crossed the stream. She knocked on the front door. And it was the master of it. He was a kindly man. He said, "Have you got a job?" He said, "Actually, I think I have, but just go round the back door and tell the servants I sent you." Well, she went round the back door, and sure enough, the servants found her a little job to do. She became a scullery maid. She was doing the washing up, standing on a wooden box, so she was tall enough to reach the sink. And she was there for a good time. She never complained. She just got on with every little word of work she was given. She never talked either. And all the servants, she wouldn't even tell the servants her name, so all the servants called her Caporushes. Well, life carried on and on and on. And one day the servants turned around and said, "Caporushes, Caporushes, there's a great dance that happens here, and all the lords and ladies and rich people and rich folks come, and we go up to a little gallery and we get ourselves a bit of cheese and wine from the cellar. The master doesn't mind. We go up there, we have a little party ourselves. You just look at everyone coming in. Do you want to come? She said, I love you, and I'd love to, but I'm far too tired. And she lay down and pretended to be on a bench, and she pretended to be asleep. Well, as soon as the servants were out the door, she's across the river, she's pulling a dress of silk coloured by the sky, and she puts that on, and she walks up, she does her hair, she's looking in the reflection in the stream, and she walks, she's beautiful. She walks down that spiral staircase into the ball. And the master catches a sight of her. He can't take her eyes off her. And he dances with her all night. And at the end of the night, she bids him good night. She goes back, she bundles her dress up, puts it back in the hollow tree, gets out her cape, lays down on the bench. In come the servants. Kappa rushes, you should have seen the most beautiful girl you've ever seen in all of your life came tonight. And the master couldn't take his eyes off her. I think he's falling in love. Oh, very interesting, said Kappa rushes, but I wish I'd seen. But maybe tomorrow. Well, the next night came. Kappa rushes, you should see it. Please come. I'd love to, she said, but I'm far too tired. She lay down on the bench and she pretended to be asleep. Off went the servants. As soon as they'd gone out the door, Kappa rushes, got up, ran across the stream, went to the hollow tree, went inside, pulled out the dress of silver. Oh, she looked good. She came down. This time the master was waiting at the bottom of the staircase. And they danced together all night, and her eyes didn't leave his, and his eyes didn't leave hers. And at the end of the night, she made her excuses. She went out and she came back, and she put on her old cape and lay down the bench. Kappa rushes, you should have seen it. She was there again tonight. Oh, this time the master was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, and he didn't dance with anyone else. He just danced with her all night. We know he's falling in love. Oh, very interesting, said Kappa rushes, but oh dear, I was far too tired. Maybe tomorrow night. Well, it's your last chance. Well, time passed by. And soon it was time for the third night of the dance. Kappa rushes, Kappa, please come. This is the last chance you've got to see it. Oh, I'd love to, but yeah, I'll tell you the truth. Just even getting ready for the ball. It's just getting everything done. I'm just completely exhausted. I'm far too tired. And she just lay down the bench. She pretended to sleep. Out went the servants. As soon as they were gone, Kappa rushes across the stream. She's got her dress of gold, and she is looking fantastic. And she goes to the ball, and the master is waiting at the top of the stairs. And they walk down together, hand in hand. And she dances with him all night, and their eyes never part. And at the end of the night, he takes a ring off his finger, and he gives it to her. And she takes one of her long golden hairs and threads it through the ring. Ties a knot and ties it round her neck and drops it down her front. Well, at the end of the night, she goes back, she puts on a big old cape. She lays down that bench, in comes the servants. Kappa rushes, you should have been, oh, such a shame that you missed it. She was there again tonight. And this time, the master took a gold ring off his finger and gave it to her, and she tied it out on her hair and she dropped it down. Oh, dear. I mean, I think our master is going to have to find her, because we know he's in love. Well, very interesting, Sir Caparoshes. I wish I'd been. I'm really disappointed to have missed it, but, well, such is life. Well, the master sent out his servants to find out the girl he'd been dancing with for 3 nights, but no one could find her. And the master, well, you know what people are like when they don't get what they want. They sulk. And the master at first was just walking around the house, his bottom lip dragging along behind him. And then he took himself to bed. And he refused to eat and he refused to drink. Now the cook, he was a big old boy, big black beard, big red face, big pot belly. And he turned around to Caparoshes, he said, look, I'm making the master soup. Let's see if he can have some soup. Now I don't know why people make you soup when you're ill. You know, personally I want cream cakes and ice cream. They always make you soup. So can you stir it, and when it's ready, can you put it in this wooden bowl and get it taken upstairs? Well, she stirred and stirred and stirred, and when the soup was ready, she put the ladle, some of it into a wooden bowl, put a little wooden spoon in it, went upstairs, and she was and got it taken upstairs. But before she sent it upstairs, she took off that ring and dropped it into the soup. She took the hair off first, obviously. Well, the master was taking the soup, and you know it's like when you're not feeling well, and hopefully none of you are in that state at the moment, and may you continue in good health. And but you know, when you are feeling ill, you don't want to eat, so you kind of push the food around the plate. It's useless with soup. You know, it keeps flopping back into the middle and going, pushing the soup around. Suddenly, click, 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 click. He takes out the ring. Bring me the person who made this soup. Well, in came the cook, big red face, big black beard, big pot belly. Well, it wasn't you, he said. Someone must have helped. Only Caparoshes, said the cook, but be nice to her. She's quiet. She does her work. Don't tell her off. Send her to me. Well, in walked Caparoshes. She stood with that big cape on and the hood pulled over her head. And the master held up the ring. Where did you get this, he said. From him who gave it to me, she said, and with that she threw back the cape. And there was the girl he'd been dancing with for 3 nights. Well, naturally, there was to be a wedding. And Caparoshes just had one request to her friends. Could the meat be served without salt? Oh, it'd be terrible, said the servants. No, please, No, just do this one thing for me. Well, okay. Well, that night, there was the master. There was his bride next to him. Veil over her face. There was all the rich people and the rich merchants gathered round the tables. And the meat was served without the salt. Remember, there was no refrigerators in those days. And the master cut off a piece of meat. And everyone else cut off a piece of meat. And then the master took that piece of meat and put it on the end of his knife. There were no forks in those days. And he lifted it to his mouth, and everyone else lifted the meat to their mouths, and they put it in their mouths, and they spat it out on the floor. Disgusting. But at the end of the table, There was much. Crying his eyes out. And I asked him what was wrong. He said, well, many years ago, it wasn't that many years ago. Seems like a lifetime to me, but time passes slowly these days. I asked my 3 daughters, how much they love me. And the oldest said she loved me more than all the gold and all the silver in all of the world, and I thought that was wonderful. And the second told me she loved me more than life itself. I thought that was even better. And the youngest, if truth be known, my favourite, turned round to me and said she loved me more than fresh meat loves salt. And I thought she didn't love me at all. And I threw her out of the house, and I've no means of knowing whether she is alive or dead. And only now do I realise she loved me most of all. And with that, Cup Rushes threw back her bridal veil and ran down and threw her arms around her father, and there was a great family reunion, and there was fresh meat served, this time with salt, and there was a grand feast, and of course, had you been there, you would have been invited. Now, whoa. I love this. I really felt like I was in a festival today. You know, there was all the extraneous noises, the lawnmower going off, the car going back. It was like someone, when you're in the middle of a set and someone turns the PA on full blast. You know, I kind of gave me that whole open air feel. But for now, I say goodbye and listen to the wonderful people that are coming on next week. But for now, remember the hand. Bye-bye. Arrivederci. See ya.
Did you enjoy that set of stories? I bet you did. And if you did enjoy that set of stories, why not show your appreciation to the storyteller by dropping a little bit of shiny coin into their virtual hat? Just below, look, it's just down there. Now, if you're looking, trying to find that virtual hat, and you can't find it, well, it means that you're probably not watching these wonderful set of stories on the worldstorytellingcafe.com website. I do suggest you go there, because not only will you find the virtual hats of all the storytellers, but you can find out more about the storytellers themselves. You can find out more about the World Storytelling Cafe. Do go there if you're not there already. Until we meet again, I hope you enjoy the rest of this day. I hope you enjoy listening to more stories. I hope to see you again at the World Storytelling Cafe.